Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast, where guests discuss all things classical theater with your host, Nathan Winkelstein.
Welcome to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. I'm so thrilled to welcome today an icon of the New York classical stage, a Tony-nominated director, an Obie Award-winning actor, as well as a playwright and a teacher. He is, as the Drama Desks titled him in a special award, the Renaissance man of American theater, Austin Pendleton. Hi, Austin. How are you?
Hi there, Nathan.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the pod. I'm so excited to talk some Hamlet with you.
Me too. Yeah.
So we are going to be looking today at the rogue and peasant slave speech from Act 2, Scene 2 in Hamlet. At this point in the play, Hamlet has been approached by the ghost. He has been told that his father has been murdered as opposed to just died in the garden, and he has been hesitating on what to do because he can't be certain that the ghost is real. He can't be certain that his own head is sane. He's uncertain where he's at. And this is the speech where he really pulls together an actual plan to find the proof he needs to act as a revenger in the play. And Austin, when you're ready, take it away.
Okay. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own content that from her working all his visage waned, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing. For Hecuba, what's Hecuba to him or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John a Dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. No, not for a king, upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain, breaks my pate across, plucks off my beard and blows it in my face, tweaks me by the nose, give me the lie into the throat as deep as to the lungs. Who does me this? Swoons. I should take it, for it cannot be, but I am pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter. Or ere this, I should have fatted all the regent's kites with this slave's awful, bloody body, villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. Oh, vengeance! Why, what an ass am I? This is most brave that I, the son of a dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, must like a whore unpack my heart with words and fall a-cursing like a very drab, a scullion, fie upon it, fie about my brain. I have heard that guilty creatures sitting in a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. For murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. I'll observe his looks. I'll tend him to the quick. If he would blench, I know my course. The spirit that I've seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume pleasing shape, yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. I'll have grounds more relative than this. The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king.
Thank you, Austin. How was it walking back down that path?
Well, quite wonderful.
Now, what is your history with this play? Both, I mean, you are a director, an actor, a teacher, a playwright. What have your interactions with this play been throughout your life?
Well, I come from Warren, Ohio, which was a heavy industrial town. And we had a sweet little old lady, and she would often take me to the movies. So when I was 8 years old, Hamlet somehow found its way into the closest thing Warren had to a theater called the Look Theater. So we sat after school, this lady and I, in the Look Theater and watched Hamlet. And she, all through the play, whispered the plot to me. So that was the first time I ever saw the Olivier film. I was, of course, blown away. Since then, I've come to think the Olivier film is not so good. But at that moment, I can remember that afternoon, which happened, of course, only a couple of years ago. But it still haunts me. So then I went to high school, I went to college, I came to New York. I began to get work. And then I was in a production, got very, very bad reviews. So I had just directed Lynn Redgrave, the great Lynn Redgrave, in a play in Chicago, the Shaw play called Misalliance. And we were having a meeting with Ted Mann at Circle in the Square about how we might bring Misalliance into New York. And we had the meeting, and he was in the event. It didn't come in, but it was a great success. So then I was in this production. I got terrible reviews. So after this meeting with Lynn Redgrave, she said, "Why don't you come to you have time before you go to Brooklyn Academy of Music. So why don't you come to the Russian tea room and I will buy you a bowl of soup." Now, my agent has asked me to write a memoir. The memoir begins with this. So we ordered. And then Lynn said, Austin, some of the great actors like my father, like Sir John, like Sir Ralph, they got reviews as bad as what you got today. And indeed, somebody gave me once a book by Kenneth Tyne, and indeed they did. And then with her tone dripping with contempt, she said, "But not, of course, for Larry." But anyway, so she said, "Now here's what you've got to do, Austin. You will not get a professionally significant acting job for 7 years." She was right down to the number of years. "So in that time, Austin, you have to go anywhere to act." Well, so now this was an era where the showcase code was really hitting its stride. And so there was a particular group called the Riverside Shakespeare Company. And there's a church on the corner of 86th and Amsterdam in New York. And there was a church loft. And in those days, many Shakespearean productions were done there. And one of them was Hamlet. And I was asked to play Hamlet. And that's how I first got introduced to this.
And how were the reviews for that one?
Very good. Yeah. And then my daughter, who had, by the way, since become a surgeon, we watched the uncut Hamlet. I forget the actor who played Hamlet, but it was quite good. And my daughter and she was like 9, kept pointing out shortcomings in the plot. And indeed, the plot, okay, There is a theory that Shakespeare and those guys, those people, when they wrote those plays, were on speed. They've done a lot of excavation around there, and they find all this equipment of snorting.
Sure.
And then it begins to make sense because Shakespeare wrote like 33 plays in half that number. Well, no, in 20 years.
Right.
And so that there's evidence now. So the first time I played King Lear, it opened, it was a catastrophe. And I played it at the New Rep up in Boston. I was in Boston because my sister lives in a farm outside of Boston. So I got terrible reviews. And then in those days, the New Rep, which lasts, doesn't exist anymore, they would play from Wednesday night through Sunday night. So I went out to Los Angeles or to San Diego, because the first production of my play, Orson's Shadow, or it was the first production after the initial one in Chicago, directed by the brilliant David Cromer. So I went out there and got very high. So then I came back and so I thought, well, I'll surely be down by the time I got there, but I wasn't.
Uh-oh.
So I did the first half of King Lear, and the stage woman, a very charming young woman, but who had been unfortunately unable to conceal her contempt for my performance. She came and said at the intermission, "What happened?" Well, I couldn't tell her that, I was on speed, and I could not ask my mother to score me for some more. So I had to figure out what to do. So all the men were in the same dressing room.
So wait, sorry, for clarity, when she said what happened, does that mean that she really liked your performance on Speed?
Yeah. She was blown away. She
I
wanted to know what
see.
happened, and I was reluctant to tell her it was on speed.
Right. But now you needed more to continue doing the performance on Speed?
Yeah. So then I had to figure out,
Okay.
and here's what I discovered. King Lear, and I think this applies to all the tragic heroes, with a lot of the characters in Shakespeare. He was on speed, King Lear. In other words, and this I think would apply to but anyway, in King Lear, I had first time I did it as an earnest actor,
Right.
worked out all the transitions. There are no transitions in these characters. They're here, and then they're there, and then they're there, and then they're there.
I very much agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when it came to me that the answer to a lot of these plays is speed. So of course you can't figure that, but you have to figure out what happens when you're on speed, which is, again, there are no transitions. You're here and you're suddenly there for no reason at all. Then I was
Interesting.
to a good friend of mine was teaching Shakespeare at Dartmouth, and he invited me over, and I told him this, and he said, "Austin, you're going to get me fired."
Yeah. Well, I do
But
find myself wondering because I'm assuming, because I know you're a very famous teacher, and but I'm assuming that the first piece of advice that you give your actors when doing Shakespeare is not to take speed. So how does the
just a slight parenthesis here. I'm furious about the fentanyl thing because it's finding its way to every drug. You can't enjoy cocaine anymore, or because fentanyl can kill you.
right?
So
Right.
so
I
the
mean,
thief,
cocaine can kill you too, but I take your point. They're different levels, different
yeah.
degrees.
Oh, cocaine. Oh boy, I used to fly on cocaine. But now because of fentanyl, this pleasure is denied me.
I'm
But the
very
point
sorry.
is that Shakespeare, these plays, it's so much the key to these plays. So you obviously can, except because of fentanyl, you can't do that anymore. But then you try to figure out the patterns of behavior
Right.
that happen when you're on speed, and that's how that totally transformed the King Lear that I did. And I have a feeling it would do the same, certainly with Hamlet or any of, yeah. I've always tried to avoid playing Polonius because it's sort of the obvious part that people would cast me in. But I'll do Polonius for a small fee. But
That's good to know. I'll keep that in mind.
Claudius, what?
I'll keep that in mind. That's good to know.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and so I'm trying to break down the speed thing a little bit. So when, for example, when you talk about no transitions, so this comes up quite a bit when I'm directing or coaching, but I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing. So when I talk about transitions, I talk about how basically actors love to kind of show their maneuver from I'm happy and in dreamland over here, and then suddenly not suddenly, I have this realization of this dark thing, and watch me maneuver down from A to B, and that actually the audience would much rather not watch you slowly go down the hill. They'd rather watch you jump off the cliff.
Right.
And is that sort of what you're referring to
Yeah,
too?
yeah, absolutely.
So in sort of more traditional acting terms, it's kind of just really strong shifts of point of view, not sitting internalizing things, but really
That's
just
right.
slam and hit.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, and that's of course especially interesting in Hamlet, because I think I'd be curious what your take is on this. I think one of the traps maybe of Hamlet is that he can
Of
become
the player or of the character?
of the character
Yeah, okay.
is
All right.
that he can become so melancholic and in his head and non-active, even though he actually is acting all the time. It just takes him a little while to act in a single direction. Whereas like if you're doing the zero transition thing, he's always trying something, it's just always changing. That which I find interesting. And then how does it in this particular speech, how does that manifest that sort of maneuver? Because he was in his, let me ask the question differently. Right before this, he's been in an entire scene where he's in his mania. He's putting on his mania. And then he's suddenly alone and he's doing this speech. How does that translate, I guess, is my question. Is
Well,
how do you make sure?
I had a wonderful director in the showcase, and she said, and this echoes, I think, what you just said. When he's alone, he resorts to it, whatever the inner form of drugs are. He's addicted. He's addicted to thinking. Thinking. See, the interesting thing about Hamlet, the character, is okay, he went to Wittenberg, which in those days was the one center of real intellectual.
Right.
When he was like 18 or 19, he didn't come back.
Right.
He didn't come back to learn anything from his father. And he had only to be called home because of the funeral. And so his love for his father, it's sort of like the lady doth protest too much. He goes on and on how wonderful his father was. He was not even interested in learning how to be king from his father. He did not come back from Wittenberg. So I think that's where Shakespeare, among the thousand ways that Shakespeare is extraordinary, all this is set up. And if you just follow the logic of everything that happens before the play begins, why didn't you come back 10 years ago, you idiot?
Right.
You had to learn how to be king. But this fall, and see, and again, as I say, the way he carries on about his father is, again, the lady doth protest too much.
Right.
You didn't like your father at all, or
at
you
least
would
you didn't know him, really.
Huh?
Well,
But I mean, he was in his late teens when he went to Wittenberg. Yeah, he knew him, and he didn't care for him.
Yeah.
Or he would have come back.
Yes, that I definitely think that I've always followed that logic too. It's funny, my logic on it followed slightly differently. My logic on it was sort of that he was something of an absent father because of how much war there was with Norway and everything. Like he was raised by his mother and was perhaps protected from his father's tougher qualities, and that he was sent away and stayed away because war was still going and on the urging of his mother. So for me, I'd always
he says right at the beginning,
Yeah.
he'd been there for the funeral. She says, go not to Wittenberg. So he's planning to go right back to
he's
Wittenberg.
planning to retreat. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that shows you how much he really cares.
Right.
I mean, he's supposed to be king now.
Well, except so let me ask about that. That's the obvious follow-up. So it's something that isn't explicitly addressed in the play. Why Hamlet is of age. Why was he stepped over by Claudius to be king? Like how was that able to happen?
Because Hamlet wasn't displaying any interest at all.
Got it.
About being king. He was, according to what Queen Gertrude, he was ready to go right back to Wittenberg.
Right, though by then we don't know the chicken or the egg there. By then, Claudius is already king, and I could easily imagine Hamlet wanting nothing to do with sticking around.
No, see, here's a fascinating thing. Shakespeare, was talented.
Yes, I think we can all agree that Shakespeare is talented.
He carries on about Claudius right from the beginning. And
yes,
where does that come from? And the wonderful thing is Shakespeare doesn't even try to explain it. He never provides any motivation for why Hamlet hates Claudius. I mean, and then when he talks to the ghost, he finally says, "Oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle." Well, he never liked Claudius, and no reason for that is given.
Can I just to give the obvious pushback here, except that he's sleeping with his mom?
Well, but he says it's evident in his opening soliloquy,
Too solid flesh.
Yeah, he's hated Claudius all along. No reason is given for that. But that's almost mischievously the power of Shakespeare. He doesn't. And now I'm a playwright also.
Mm-hmm.
And what you learn from Shakespeare is sometimes it's wise not to provide a motivation. So every member of the audience can fill in why they would feel that way. So Shakespeare in this play, I think more than any of his others, even in all the plays, at critical junctures, he doesn't even attempt to provide a motivation. So that leaves the audience to fill it in, and that magnetizes the audience.
Well, this is like Iago, right? Like we're fascinated by Iago.
No, Iago's motivation is explicit from day one. I played Iago once in a showcase. Othello has done the unforgivable thing to Iago. I mean, Iago's risked his life on the battlefield for all these years, but Othello, out of his own insecurity as a black man, with the cultural heads of the city of Venice, passes over him for this boy. So all the professors say the motiveless malignity. The motive is explicitly stated, practically in the first line of the play. That because in those days in the military, and I've been told that up until just quite recently, if you wanted to spend your life in the army and you didn't get promoted at a critical moment, you would be stuck in that position in the military for the rest of your life. So Othello has ruined his life.
That is still true. Both my brothers are military. That is still true that there are certain moments where basically if you are not chosen for particular command, you have reached the top of your growth curve. So to speak.
And if you want to spend your life in the army, you're stuck at wherever that is. So Iago has an incredible motivation. And it's said out loud. I played Iago too. It's said out loud.
Right. Well, that is another podcast, which maybe we'll do. So we'll bring it back. We'll bring that one back around. But in this case, you're saying that Hamlet, because Hamlet this is almost me speaking to you as a playwright now. is Hamlet is such a disruption in so many ways of the traditional Revenger's tragedy that it does seem like to some degree that was Shakespeare's brilliance, was he was like, here is this set of archetypes that everyone in the audience thinks they know.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to mess with them. I'm going to mess with their expectations. It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet, where he starts it as a comedy before turning it to a tragedy, as he was actively disrupting the expectations of the time. So that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like the revenger who refuses to revenge for the first half of the play. It's very different.
First 3/4 of the play.
First 3/4 of the play, right?
Yeah,
Really until after the play within the play.
Yeah.
Let me ask, moving back, and I mean, I think the kind of what are the motivations is going to percolate throughout this conversation. But something that I wanted to ask specifically about Rogue and Peasant Slave, or about the motivation of that speech, which I was just curious to hear from you as the consummate player, is how sort of interestingly meta it is that Hamlet's motivating the thing that gets him off his butt here is watching actors. And I was always curious. I'm curious how you, having played Hamlet, and I think it's very interesting that you haven't mentioned your run at the 10-minute stoppered Hamlet that you did, but which was incredible. But what do you think playwright wise? Talk to me a little bit about that moment of using the actors as this disrupting force in the play, and why Shakespeare might have chosen that, and why that might have been effective.
Well, I think in Shakespeare's era, the actors were confronted and exhilarated by a new freedom, because before then had been the medieval play, and the power of the medieval plays, which can be considerable, is it's in a very fixed form, and some of those plays are just awesome for that reason. Then Shakespeare comes along and snorts and all that kind of thing, like his fellow playwrights, and he just introduces a whole new sense of structure. And I think that I mean, I was very young during the Elizabethan age, so maybe I don't remember. But but I would think that the actors were exhilarated by this shaking off of the strict and very powerful forms of the medieval theater. So that had to affect the acting. And it had to affect the whole idea of acting. To act in a medieval play, even if you do it right now, the form is so strict, and the approach to characterization is so strict that they suddenly come upon this playwright, and the other playwrights too of that time. I mean, Christopher Marlowe was kick-ass, and had he not been stupid enough to behave in a barroom brawl, he would have gone to, I think, a career equally as inspired as Shakespeare. But because of the relaxation of the forms, it was without fear, it was reckless.
Right.
And that must have been very exhilarating for the actors. Particularly the actors had been already playing in the medieval plays. It was like suddenly the doors are flung open and everybody can go out and play. I've always sensed that must have been the atmosphere for actors at Shakespeare's time.
And I would say, just for listeners who haven't listened to some of the other podcasts where this came up, just so you know what Austin is referring to here, and pardon me, I am not Dakin Matthews. I'm not a complete expert on these things, but I think I'll be able to give it. Previous to Marlowe and Shakespeare, the verse rhyme was in heroic verse, which were rhyming strictly metered rhyming couplets.
Yeah.
And Marlowe and Shakespeare, and we see that still. We see that a little bit in Romeo and Juliet. We see that in Midsummer. It's freer, but you still see the rhyming couplet.
Mhm.
And then Marlowe and Shakespeare broke that into blank verse, which
Yeah,
was non-rhyming couplets, except for at the
yeah.
end of scenes, which had much more freedom inside the line and at the end of the line, which is what we now think of. And I think it's really important for people to know this. And I know I've talked about it in other podcasts, but I find it very important for the reason that Austin is just saying is Shakespeare was a revolutionary in making plays more like the general parlance of the populace. He was working to find truth with his verse. Now there can be a trap now where we think of him as like this great poet and we actually try to estrange his language from the inner truth of a human, but that's actually the exact opposite of what Shakespeare was a true revolutionary in exploring. And that's one of my personal bugaboos. So just taking a second to jump on the soapbox there.
Now, I had a high school teacher, I went to a prep school in Cleveland called University School, which is all boys, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this very witty teacher, and he was teaching the playwriting of it. And he talked about the team of Beaumont and Fletcher. And I remember one day he said of Beaumont, he would all call us gentlemen. He said about Beaumont and Fletcher, gentlemen, they were that way about each other. So among the new freedoms was Shakespeare was the evidence of his plays very possibly bisexual. And certainly Christopher Marlowe was, and Beaumont and Fletcher, according to this teacher, were. So among the new freedoms were a greatly new sexual freedom. People could be bisexual. Now, that is so against any medieval tradition
Yeah.
that it must have been feeling like the actors could suddenly just go out and play when they were playing the plays.
And so to bring that back in, it is interesting that you sort of see that the prompt for this question was how Hamlet is inspired by the actors in the play, by the players.
I mean, Hamlet and Horatio, what can one say?
Well, yes. Yes, I
And,
agree.
and Hamlet's aggressive misogyny. I mean, he drives poor Ophelia to suicide. And I think easily the best scene in Hamlet, and one of the great scenes in Shakespeare, one of the great scenes ever, is what's called the closet scene, the encounter with the mother. I think
Yes.
that is so, and I've played it, and I've also directed it with Peter Sarsgaard. And that's the scene. It's awesomely complex and brilliant, and yet it's written with such spontaneity.
Yes.
You feel the exhilaration in the writing of just being able to do anything.
Yes. And well, I guess since we're on that point, and it sort of goes to the question of this speech as well, and the question of kind of the manic disposition versus
Yeah.
what else is going on is it is in the closet scene, at least for me, it is in the closet scene where we start to see how do I put it? The barrier of is there actually a sane Hamlet and a crazy Hamlet, or is there just a Hamlet? And because in that scene, there's some question of where he's falling on the mania spectrum, I would say. Because a lot of the language, it's also the ghost showing up. It's odd that the ghost is not visible in that scene to Gertrude, whereas in the first scene, the ghost was visible to other people. I find that strange. And much of the language and the attack that Hamlet uses in that scene, frankly, is over the line. And it's just an interesting moment of really seeing how disrupted this man is.
Yeah.
And do you have any, how did you solve as a director or as an actor, did you question the fact that like the ghost was visible for other people the first time it appears, but not in the chamber scene? Was that, or did you consider that a red herring?
Well, when I directed the play, I eliminated, I mean, the ghost was there, but he was never visible. So, like in the closet scene, Hamlet would suddenly fall silent. and Gertrude would think, what the fuck is going on? And there would just be a long pause. It would take as long as it would have taken if you heard the ghost speak.
That's very cool. I have considered that. I didn't know that anyone had done it. That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool beat. So you just removed the ghost. So the ghost could neither be seen nor heard.
Right. In fact, I eliminated the scene where Hamlet talks to the ghost at the beginning, so that the audience then would have the same experience as the other characters. Why is this man behaving like this?
Yes. Yeah.
And if I were to direct Hamlet again, and I must talk to Peter about this, I think I'd do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most compelling moments it reminds me of, and I apologize that I don't remember the director's name, but the director who directed Patrick Stewart in the Scottish play at the National pulled a similar thing with the banquet scene. Yes.
That's
and
great.
did it. He played the scene twice, once on one side of the intermission, once on the other. On the first side of the intermission, the ghost was there. On the other side of the intermission, they played the scene again, it was only Macbeth responding. And it's a very, very compelling way to show just how freaky his behavior is for everyone else at that
point. Yeah, right. Yeah. And my mother directed that. Her two favorite Shakespearean plays were Macbeth, Taming of the Shrew. Make of that what you will. But she loved Macbeth. So when my father passed in 1985, this lovely lady who ran a small college down in West Virginia, this was in June, she said, Francis, why don't you come down this fall and direct a production of Macbeth with our students? And I thought I wasn't going to be able to make it because I was in short circuit. But we wrapped all the scenes that I was in short circuit, me and a whole bunch of other people, like a day or two before. So I decided to fly. I flew to Kennedy and then I went to LaGuardia without going home. And so I booked a flight to West Virginia. And so it was the summer of great floods. So I had to keep and I hadn't told my mother. 5 minutes before her production of Macbeth began, I arrived. And now, as I say, all these floods had happened, and none of the students had people they in their family anyway who had drowned or anything. But and I saw every performance that night, which were all the performances they gave. At night, overhead, you could hear helicopters that obviously were carrying the body bags. And it visibly affected the actors. And really, that's the most powerful on-stage Macbeth I've ever seen. Mm. The place was just charged with fear of people being dead. And I thought, there have been obviously a couple of wonderful films of Macbeth. And God, the Kurosawa one, Throne of Blood. Have you ever seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the Orson, but on stage, it never really quite works, except that time with those terrified students. It was, I still remember everything about that show. And I was there the whole week. I saw it every night.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. I sometimes talk to actors about this, about how, like, even in the Elizabethan era compared to now, well, especially in the Elizabethan era because of the bubonic plague, was like just death wasn't theoretical.
Yeah, right.
And people dying or waking up and finding out that somebody you know is dead was
in
not
the bed next to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that like that is something that we have to dig deep to try to engage with, is the reality of that. Yeah. Is like we take 2 days off from work because somebody who's 95 years old died. and we're sad about it.
Yeah.
And as we should, but it was very different back then. And very different in Macbeth. That's an interesting point. I mean, and it hangs over this play too, of like something that just because it's not considered the essential element of the play is that this is a wartime play.
Oh yeah.
Like there are armies marching the whole time that this play is happening.
King Hamlet today would be brought before the Hague.
Right.
There's absolutely no need to have a war with Norway.
No.
Yeah. And so again, just I keep coming back to this. The figure of the ghost in Hamlet is a very disturbing figure.
Yes.
Today he would be the far right wing.
Yep.
Today he would be in Trump's cabinet.
Yeah, well, hopefully they won't have quite the same freedom that he has in that play, but we never
Yeah,
know.
right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But you know who he would be? He would be a better example is he would be Putin.
Yeah.
You know, he attacks the country next to him because it's time to attack the country next to him. It helps to consolidate power to be at war.
Yeah, that's right.
And frankly, that runs throughout the canon. That's what Henry's doing in Henry V.
Mm-hmm.
It's Henry IV tells him, hey, the way to stop everybody fighting each other is go fight somebody else. And off they go to fight France. You know, it was a way of the consolidation of power at the time. And is still used as such today, which I do find an interesting element of the play. I've never quite figured out how you engage that in the play in a way that is effective, that sort of feel of we are a wartime state.
So I've already approached Peter about another production of Hamlet.
Great.
And Peter, of course, carries a lot of weight. Have you ever seen the movie that Maggie directed?
I have not.
Oh, God, watch it. It's poetry.
Oh, good. Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I've heard that she's an incredible director. I would love to watch it. And
her personality, she's just very gentle and sweet and very firm.
Yeah. No, I would love to work with her at some point. If you do the Hamlet at CSC and you need an assistant director or something, let me know.
Consider yourself hired.
Yes. I didn't think I would assist again, but I would assist on that production. But yeah, it's interesting. Well, if you were to do the production again, if you were to direct the production again, why? Why do you want to do it again?
Because it's a play that changes as you do, more than any other Shakespearean play that I know, or almost any play. It just, wherever you are, it's a mirror.
Right.
If you want to find out where you are in life, direct Hamlet.
What about play Hamlet?
Well, Ian McKellen played him just recently, the age of 82. I have casually, quote unquote, brought that up to a number of people.
Well, because I guess my point is, as someone who is also a director and an actor and has both directed and performed in Hamlet, I agree. It's interesting that you say that about direction. I, frankly, haven't had a chance to evolve enough from the last time I did it to really be able to say that, but I definitely understand it as an actor. I definitely think that the Hamlet of a 25-year-old is extremely different from the Hamlet of a 35-year-old, is different from the Hamlet of a 45-year-old and onwards.
Yeah.
And it is one of the great roles and one of the most overwhelming roles, I think, in some ways, because of that, because it is such a mirror to the soul. And sometimes when you're out there in front of a few hundred people, you go, do I really want to be showing them a mirror to my soul?
Yeah, right.
That's one of the things that I find most compelling about Hamlet is how flawed he is as a leading man.
And people, sometimes I get people just refuse to understand that. And therefore they simplify the play considerably.
In what way? Like just trying to make him like the clear protagonist and just good guy.
Yeah. He's a lost soul.
Oh, he's a mess.
Yeah. And very few actors have approached it that way.
That's interesting. That's it, because it's hard for me to imagine it being approached any other way. Because he's stuck in yeah, I really do think well, maybe this is what you're referring to, is that we almost have the problem, I guess I would say, that Hamlet is considered this Mount Everest of acting. And so whenever someone goes to do Hamlet, they're like, Christ, everyone's going to be judging my acting based on this, which is almost a completely antithetical feeling to the vulnerability you need to be able to bring to Hamlet. Is like, if you're going, oh shit, everybody's watching my acting, you don't have a chance.
Well, you have to start, it's explicit, with I won't even say the idea, the fact that he's a misogynist. I mean, at the beginning of the play, he says, frailty, thy name is woman. He's a misogynist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he and Horatio have ever actually had sex together, but they have, although in Elizabeth, I mean, probably they did, but Hamlet is horrifying with the two women in the play. And when you bring this up, people say, "Oh no, you're oversimple." But it like he says, frailty, thy name is woman. He drives Ophelia to suicide. He takes over Ophelia's funeral, kicks her brother out. His behavior throughout the play really is outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
And one mainspring of it is his explicitly stated misogyny. But people don't ever write about that. They write about how like Harold Bloom, who I think was a brilliant guy, but the pinnacle of thought, Hamlet is, his thought is so constricted by things like his misogyny and but like his unspoken hatred of his father. Actually, Hamlet's a more interesting character than he's often is made out to be. But people seem to want to avoid facing his directly stated misogyny.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think that this actually frankly goes to a debate in this nation that's mainly these days revolving around racism, is
Yeah.
that there is this sort of oversimplified version of what a misogynist is, of what a racist is, that
Yeah.
prevents us from seeing the more complex version of what a misogynist is or a racist is. It's like Hamlet, I don't think Hamlet walks around going, I hate women. But when
Well, he does. Frailty, thy name is woman.
well, right, but my point is, he in that moment, he is in a moment of upset, and he immediately lashes out. Right? Is that it's like, and that's the thing that I think is really interesting about misogyny and about racism and about how insidious they are, is that if he's just chilling with his buddy, well, maybe his buddy's a bad example. If he's talking to a woman, he wouldn't think he's a misogynist. But the moment any bad pressure comes on him, his blame goes the women in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a kind of a dark insidiousness. And it seems like you could sort of imagine he may have inherited that from his dad. You get the sense.
Yeah.
So
I think, and this is ludicrous, I mean, Hamlet is in a way kind of an underrated play. It's meant to be. I mean, Harold Bloom was a brilliant guy, and he says Hamlet is the pinnacle of thought. Hamlet is stupid. He's blinkered in his view of everything because, as I said, his misogyny, but his lying to himself, maybe, and certainly to everybody else about his love for his father, to whom he is, up until the point of the play begins, exhibited public contempt by just staying away. A prince is supposed to come home and learn from his father, and he's actually thinking to go back to Wittenberg. I mean, again, Gertrude says, no, go not to Wittenberg. He's planning to go right back there, even though It's time for him to take over.
So it's interesting to me that I think I know what you mean, but I'm going to push a little bit back on you using the term stupid to describe Hamlet because I think
I'm emotionally stupid.
yeah, well, I like the term blinkered that you use. Like I like because I actually find him to be a more interesting character if he's stunningly brilliant and equally mentally crippled, right? Like
Mhm.
equally crippled by his limitations and by his blinkeredness. And that it is actually in that we find the fascination that this man is capable of thinking at an incredible level, but he thinks inside these incredibly contained boxes that are created by the culture and by his upbringing. And that I think is a really interesting and important lesson to learn about how we're made by the society that surrounds us. We're made by the people that train us. We're made by our limitations. And you can be the smartest man in the world. You can be Hamlet, and you will still be limited in that way. You will still move towards misogyny. You will still do XYZ. And I find that it's very depressing and is a little bit anti how I normally think of Shakespeare, who I actually think of as a rather optimistic playwright.
Yeah.
But in this play, it's a little the argument could be made that Hamlet, the nature of Hamlet, had the potential to be a great man and a great king, and the nurture of Hamlet prevents that, which is interesting.
But Hamlet is not a victim.
No, no.
I mean,
If anything, he's the opposite.
I just keep going over this and over this. He was not planning to be king. He wanted to go back to Wittenberg.
Right.
His scene, what's this? The scene with Ophelia halfway through the play is
Get thee
appalling.
to a nunnery. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the cruelty is just so the absolute. And I think Shakespeare meant this to be offensive. And then all of a sudden he jumps into her grave. He tells off Laertes, her brother. And I think, where the fuck do you think you're coming from?
Right.
You're the one who drove her there.
Mm-hmm.
You won't even admit it.
No, he never takes blame for that.
Yeah.
He doesn't really accept blame too much for
anything at all.
Anything. Yeah.
Puts him as very. I've played King Lear twice, and of course I've seen productions of Macbeth and Othello. All those people, those quote tragic heroes, assume responsibility, and it brings them down. Hamlet never assumes responsibility for anything.
Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting point because his journey feels his growth, such as it is internal, not external.
Yeah. There's no evidence at all that he would be an effective king.
No, that is certainly true. Claudius would be a much better king.
To the point where I think, if I may presume, that this was intentional on Shakespeare's part. And I think, and it just fascinates me how the play has been so willfully misunderstood.
Yeah, trying to turn
it's an actually more interesting play than people make it out to be. Hamlet is not, as Harold Bloom was brilliant, but Hamlet is not the pinnacle of thought.
No, he's incredibly flawed, which is actually, I think, why we love is the wrong word, why we're fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question because I know I have an opinion on it, but I'm sure you do too. What is in a summation form? What is Hamlet's, to use a stereotype, character arc in the play? What does he grow or deteriorate to be? What is his evolution?
To me, what's fascinating is he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Alone among all the tragic heroes, he never grapples with anything. all the Lear, Macbeth, Othello, Iago, as I say, they grapple with with what they're challenged with. Hamlet, the Hamlet's essentially horizontal. He never comes to new insights.
Yeah, it's
He
interesting. It's interesting for you to say that he doesn't grapple because of course he has those soliloquies in the canon where he grapples with things like whether or not to exist. But
his,
I see what you mean that he's not.
you'll forgive my saying this, and I do think it's intentional in the writing. I mean, the guy knew what he was doing. Those soliloquies are masturbation.
Yeah, I
They
understand.
don't take him anywhere.
Rogue and Peasant Slave is an exception.
No.
I mean, he gets to the
So,
idea
so,
of a plan.
so he, yeah. So that's at the very best. That's clever.
Yeah,
So he
but you're
put,
right that he doesn't solve the theoretical grapple of whether or not he's a coward. He just sort of lets it go. He literally
yeah,
goes far about my brain and then
yeah,
just makes a plan.
yeah. And then he goes on to emotionally assault his mother, drive Ophelia to her suicide.
Hmm.
The
Yeah, it's
Hamlet Horatio relationship is curiously unexplored by anybody. Horatio's a fascinating character, but I always get the feeling that Horatio's obviously a very sweet guy, has just the only one in the play who has learned somehow to deal with Hamlet.
yes. Yes. Well, can what is going on? I think I have an answer to this, but I'm curious. At the very beginning, he doesn't recognize it. Like how close are they at the beginning of the play? Is that a relationship that grows during the play or is that a pre-existing? I mean, obviously they knew each other before, but there is at least the
Well, I think, and this is what's so interesting in the writing, I think Hamlet, when he comes home, well, first of all, he's been away for many years. And Horatio's obviously changed.
Mhm.
And the others he knows because he's related to them.
Right.
Hamlet's treatment of Polonius is astoundingly cruel. I think Polonius, again, is another misunderstood character. Polonius's observations about things are incredibly smart. And Hamlet just makes fun of him and call him a stupid old man and all that.
Mhm.
Hamlet's it goes beyond misogyny. What is it when you don't trust anybody? There's there's
I
some
mean,
word.
misanthropy.
Yeah, yeah. He's a misanthrope,
Yeah.
and and that's it's hard to deny that. There's no one except Horatio in the play that he shows any respect for. So that, to me, that's what makes the play interesting. But when people go on calling him the pinnacle of Western thought, they just totally miss the point.
It's an interesting theory that he's sort of intellectually he has the weapon, the intellectual weapon is definitely in his quiver, but that he's emotionally stunted.
Yeah.
That he doesn't he actually uses it's like apologies as if we could get nerdier. It's like
No, but
it's like
yeah, you're right.
it's like in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, for those of you listening. It's
Yeah.
like he has a super high intelligence score but a super low wisdom score. um
Yeah. See, now to me, that's fascinating.
right.
But I don't think I've ever seen that acknowledged.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Peter Sarsgaard really picked up on that and kind of ran with it.
I could see that in Peter for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating. We're nearing our hour. Is there any final pearls of wisdom other than that all young actors should take speed in terms of
Right.
how to how well, here, let me put it this way. If you had 1 minute to tell people like this is what you should think about while reading a Shakespeare play, what would you tell
The word liberation in Elizabethan England, thanks to that marvelous queen, People were encouraged to think whatever they wanted to. That's what, and that's the,
No, that's great because so many people think poetry, and liberation feels like the opposite of that in some ways.
it was kind of like, I don't want to oversimplify, kind of like the late 60s.
Sure.
And when everybody
I was young then.
I was 27 and everybody was doing absolutely everything. And it was very sudden.
Right.
So like the doors were just suddenly thrown. And that, I think, historically was what was happening in Elizabethan England, thanks in part certainly to that revolutionary queen.
Right. It's interesting, just looking at the plays through that lens of liberation and revolution to some degree.
There's this sense in Shakespeare's plays, my God, I can write about anything.
Right.
And what I think is so and excites so many people about his writing is there's this sense you can feel it. And the plots are outrageous.
Yeah, and as long as he doesn't explicitly go after the current royal line, he can, and as long as he throws some jokes at the French, he can basically get away with a lot.
Yeah.
Because it is true that definitely some of the other playwrights, there were lines you couldn't cross, and some of the other playwrights crossed them. But so Shakespeare was good at walking that tightrope, but it was a much easier tightrope than ever before, I think, for sure. That's great. Well, awesome. This has been a pleasure. This is the first time that we've gotten to engage in discussing classical text. I admit in the first 10 minutes, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to release a podcast where the moral of the story was do drugs. But I feel like we found the message, and this has been.
I think the message of this whole hour is do something to fix the drug of fentanyl.
Yes, do something to fix the drug of fentanyl, and classical theater will benefit.
That's right.
That is. I'm glad we found the mission. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Austin, and thank you, audience, for listening. And I hope you stay tuned. There's lots more podcasts to listen to. Our rebels now are ended.
Thanks for tuning in to the Red Bull Theater Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your support helps us to bring you more captivating conversations and insights into the world of classic theater. To stay updated on our latest activities, follow us on social media, get on our mailing list, and visit www.redbulltheater.com, where you'll find an abundance of podcasts, readings, classes, seminars, productions, and more. Your support makes all of this possible, so please consider making a tax-deductible donation on our website to help us continue bringing classical theater to contemporary audiences. Until next time, thanks, and ever thanks.